Hello and welcome to Foreign Policy Focus. This is episode 143 and I'm the show's host, Kyle. Foreign Policy Focus is the podcast where I discuss current events related to foreign policy and international news and then get some analysis on those events. The show is continuing to grow because of everybody's support, sharing the show and giving me ratings and reviews on iTunes and Stitcher. If you want to share the show, foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com. You could go to thelibertarianinstitute.org/Kyle and you can find the show there. And you can also find the show at the Facebook page, The Libertarian Union. Also been getting some traction on Twitter lately and I'm trying to tweet a little bit more. So anybody who wants that kind of commentary or to follow me there, I'm at KYAAALE. Supposed to be the, Cartman Kyle South Park thing. Alright, so to get into what I'm talking about today is I want to talk about Turkey and kind of the interesting position in the game that Turkey is playing right now, especially when it comes to Syria, NATO, United States, and Russia. Now, Turkey itself is not a EU member state, but it is a NATO member state. There's some importance to this, and that is, it's kind of the only NATO member state that enters into the Middle East foray area, while the United States is allied with Israel and Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and several other states down there. They're not NATO allies. This means that Turkey is part of the NATO air defense system, or at least was, where the United States was able to put all the different anti-surface-to-air missile batteries in different countries in a way they, say to deter Russia and link them all up to have, all the data coming in all the time. Turkey also has the second largest army, at least standing army in NATO at, I believe, about 500,000 troops. Turkey is one of the largest NATO states other than the United States as far as population goes. And the United States has, I think, about 50 nuclear weapons stored at the Incirlik Air Base in Turkey. I don't think those missiles are loaded up into silos at all times, but they're definitely there in Turkey. Now, the current situation in Turkey is that there's an internal conflict in Turkey between the Turkish government, majority Sunni Muslims, and the Kurdish PKK. Now, the Turkish government has waged several wars against the Kurdish population there. There's the Kurdish militia, the PKK, which also has a political wing that has some representation in the Turkish government. However, several members of the Kurdish government have reportedly been arrested, and their members of parliament have been arrested in Turkey. I think the PKK fights what it sees as an insurgency against an occupying force of the Turkish government. Turkey, and I believe the rest of the international community, recognize the PKK as a terror organization. They do carry out insurgency-like terror bombings and attacks like that. Also within Turkey, you have Erdogan really increasing his power since his rise to prime minister. He then switched over to presidency when he termed out prime minister, but usurped most of the powers of prime minister, so he had quite a bit of control in Turkey already. At times where maybe his power grabs were at threat from the democratic system within Turkey, Erdogan has pit fights with the Kurds to rally popular support to his side. Reports from in Turkey suggest that Turkey is moving in the way of lesser liberalization, not more liberalization, since Erdogan has started to enforce some even more social rules on the country, including banning LGBT type events and showcasings in the capital city of Ankara. Quite a bit of the power grab by Erdogan occurred after a coup July 15th of 2016. A small number of Turkish troops took to the streets of the capital city of Ankara, and Erdogan himself was on vacation. Allegedly, an assassination team or a kidnapping team tried to capture him. I guess that mission failed. Interesting, Erdogan apparently reached the nation by hooking up with FaceTime, ensuring everybody that everything was okay. The people went to the streets and drove the soldiers back. Most of the soldiers were young-looking kids. There's a lot of speculation that there wasn't something quite right about this coup attempt. Either people who said they were going to go along didn't, or possibly that was staged by Erdogan, or possibly he had a heads up on it and was able to, kind of manipulate it and play it. Either way, what happened was, and more or less the accepted narrative is that Erdogan used this to gain emergency powers that he holds till this day. Other interesting notes about the coup, and that is that the United States didn't reach out to support the Turkish government right away. However, the Iranian government did. And I don't think that this is something that Erdogan has forgotten. I think as I taught through this episode, you'll see a couple more instances of why that may be the case. Now, right now, there's a couple things that Turkey is doing that are playing big, pieces on the, general geopolitical strategy board here. The first is that Turkey continues to threaten to invade the Kurdish areas of Syria. There's two different Kurdish areas in Syria. You have the large Rojava state, which exists east to the Euphrates River in Syria. And then detached from that, you have a small enclave northwest of Aleppo, and that's the Afrin enclave. Now, in both places, you have a militia backed by the United States known as the YPG, which is a Syrian Kurdish militia that, controls the territory. Turkey says that the PKK is just an extension, or the YPG is just an extension of the PKK, and that's a terrorist organization. Obviously, the US and Western countries disagree because they're backing the PKK. You also have an interesting situation where in the Afrin enclave, you have some Russian troops that are keeping Turkey from invading the Afrin enclave. And then on the western front of the Rojava state, you have the US Rangers in between the Kurdish-backed Syrian rebels and the Turkish-backed Syrian rebels and then the Kurdish YPG forces, and those are on either lines of the city of Manbij. And so with Turkey's threatening to invade here, you're gonna have a couple possibilities happen. Maybe one of the superpowers, either Russia or the United States, will end their backing for the Kurds and allow the Turks to come in and take them out. This would create quite a bit of other fallout in Syria, especially because Assad has denounced the Kurdish plan to do this and would consider it an invasion of sovereign Syria. Russia has more or less reflected the same position. However, Russia continues to talk with the Turks. So, I guess I feel less confident that the Russians wouldn't abandon the Kurds versus the Americans who have gave them so many weapons. Turkey has put missiles and troops right up on the border because both the Rojava state and the Afrin enclave border the border Turkey from Syria. And I believe Turkey has even begun shelling it. There has been some, border fighting between Syria and Turkey in the past where the Kurds hold the Syrian side of the line. However, this looks to be a invasion force that Turkey is preparing here. So, a whole new ballgame if Turkey invades Syria. What does Assad do? What does the United States do? What does Russia do? What does Israel do? There's so many possible questions and paths this could take. However, it's worth noting that Tillerson today again said that the United States supports the Assad must go path, which is the one that Erdogan himself wants in Syria as well. Now, the other big game that Turkey is playing right now is they're going to purchase the S-400 missile system from Russia rather than buying, I believe, THAAD missile systems from the United States. So NATO defense, missile defense, and air defense systems are all American-made. I believe either Patriot missile batteries or THAAD missile batteries. Of course, these are just huge boondoggle contracts to Lockheed Martin and the rest of the military-industrial complex that continue to get rich off of our wealth and blood. However, the United, systems that they all use allows for the United States to paint a pretty big picture and have a pretty good, at least what they believe, tactical advantage having all these missile systems locked up. Now, if Turkey were to break from that and adopt the Russian system, then they would obviously no longer be within the American system. And, I don't know if there's any actual strategic disadvantage here, but the generals certainly say so. But the bigger deal is that this seems to be something that I suggested on the podcast in the past, and I had read in The Economist, and that is that the S-400 missile system is superior to the American missile system, and there's an awful lot of money within Washington that really wants to sell American missile defense systems. And so if other countries are buying from Russia, they're not buying from the United States, and this has lost money to them, and they want the United States political elite to apply, pressure on these other countries to buy the American systems. This also means that Turkey won't be able to buy the F-35. America sees it as too much of a tactical disadvantage for Turkey to have both the information of the S-400 missile defense system and the American fighter jet. And so I think some people imagine that Erdogan here sees himself as trying to play both sides of everything and trying to win big gains for Turkey. I think Erdogan maybe does have an eye on expansion. He's made some dog whistle statements in the past, which certainly seem to indicate that he had his eye on Mosul and even has some troops in northern Iraq there. And so it's not impossible for Turkey to once again to try to rule Mosul under the Ottoman Empire that was all under one rule. Also possibly taking portions of Syria if he were to move into the Afrin enclave and doesn't want Assad to one day take power again, then Erdogan would have to stay. Of course, Turkey played a critical role in the rise of the rebel groups, what was known as the Jihadist Highway, where jihadist fighters from around the Arab world were able to filter into Syria and then take up arms against the Assad government and really become the ISIS fighters and the al-Nusra, al-Qaeda linked fighters that we have in Syria today. All that happened through Turkey. And then you also had ISIS oil sales. There's pretty good evidence that those oil sales were going through the Turkish border and being sold there. And so Turkey could have locked down their borders, but they chose not to, and, allowed for the rise of the Syrian rebels and the jihadist problem that exists in Syria today. So here's the big part of the mess, right? Turkey says Assad must go. The United States says Assad must go. Turkey says the Kurds can't have a state. The United States says the Kurds can have a state. Assad says the Kurds can have a state, but they can have more independence. I think Turkey doesn't like that much independence for Assad. I don't see any evidence or any reason that Turkey would necessarily be opposed to Iranian influence within Syria. I know that's Israel's big contention. However, Turkey and Iran have been brought a little bit closer due to the Qatar issue as well, and have worked together on that. And that's another interesting move Erdogan has made, breaking with the Arab Sunni powerhouse in Saudi Arabia and going along with Iran and aiding Qatar after Saudi Arabia broke relations with that country. So Erdogan has some very important choices to make coming up. It'll be really interesting to see what he does, but I just want to highlight for all of you where we kind of stand right now and what moves Turkey could play. We've seen Erdogan very willing to move closer to the Russians. I believe he handed over the people who he says ordered the missile fire that shot down the Russian jet. I'm not sure if, that was the actual guy, but that's what he says that guy did. Of course, the nuclear weapons that in Turkey are pretty significant. The fact that Turkey's the second largest standing army in NATO, that they exist in the Middle East, that Erdogan's a, powerful guy and seems to be increasing in power. Everybody likes to talk about and highlight Putin, Trump, and Kim Jong-un. Well, the guy right now that may be able to provoke the most hostility and the most problems, could be Erdogan. Although, from how it looks to me, I'm hoping at least that the superpowers in Russia and the United States will just kind of tell Erdogan to knock it off. Don't invade Syria. Don't make this situation any worse. I have to imagine that now, there's kind of a light at the end of the tunnel for both the United States and Russia, where the Syrian civil war could one day end and then they could not have to fight so hard, to continue, with the geopolitical problems there. And so hopefully, they just, tell Turkey to knock it off. Unfortunately, Assad's gonna stay. There's not gonna be a formal Kurdish state, but it'll be somewhat autonomous, and you're just gonna have to deal with that, and then you could buy the S-400 system. So I got some good news for everybody today. I saw a story today that Korea will have their teams walk together under the same banner. They did this in 2006, as it'll be a white and blue United Korea flag. And, this is the way the Korean state is. It was the truce negotiated between the United States, I guess Kim Jong-un's grandfather, and the Chinese government that drew a line in the middle of North Korea and created a North and South Korea. But for the most part, all these people are relatives and they're all one people. And if one day America was split between the Mississippi River and now we are East and West America, it wouldn't change the fact that we all have relatives on the opposite coast. We have Rex Tillerson making a somewhat delusional statement while I believe in Vancouver. He was talking about North Korea and said the United States cannot accept North Korea as a nuclear weapon state. Now here's the problem, and this is largely the problem with what United States foreign policy has been in the past 25 years or so. And that is, we imagine whatever we want is gonna come true. Well, sorry, Rex Tillerson, North Korea already has nuclear weapons. Like, North Korea is a nuclear weapon state. You accept it or not, the fact is that it is. Now the question now is what to do now that North Korea has nuclear weapons. And you could say that, we want North Korea to denuclearize, but that's a much, tougher sell and a much harder thing to do than to accept that North Korea has some nuclear weapons, but try and make friends with them instead. Also saw a disturbing statement from Representative, I believe, Mark Thornberry of Texas, saying that the United States is training very seriously for an invasion of North Korea. Now, one of my fears is that, people could create these very beautiful, worded pictures for Trump about how the United States will sneak into North Korea and secure all the nuclear weapons and kill all the bad guys and free the people. And if somebody like an HR McMaster, wanted to be the mastermind genius behind the greatest military victory ever and take a shot at it, that's, something that Trump might buy in for. And so hopefully we're not seeing an invasion of North Korea, but man, I want to say that things are looking good from the sense that, what the Koreans are doing. They're talking to each other. They're getting along. Everything's positive in that realm. And I still don't move away from my position that nuclear war with North Korea isn't imminent. But at the same time, we gotta keep a very careful eye on what the Trump administration is doing. I read an excellent article by Kelly Vallejos, which I'll link to in the show notes page, where she goes through and just details how all these neoconservatives are starting to seep into the Trump administration. If you look at what happened in the George W. Bush administration, where the neocons came in, led by John Bolton, and destroyed the agreed framework, which would prevent North Korea from ever getting nuclear weapons, and turned it into a nuclear weapons state. This is the risk. These are the people we gotta stop, and this is what we have to be aware of. An interesting story coming out of the United States. 2 U.S. ship commanders, that of the USS John McCain and the USS Fitzgerald, will be charged with negligent homicide after their ships ran into commercial ships, sailing around, I believe, the South China Sea and maybe the East China Sea. I think the Fitzgerald was a little bit closer to Japan. Either way, the interesting thing is that these ships are apparently operating without their locators on, and so other ships didn't know where they were, and that in part probably led to the collisions. Also, the fact that these ships are out sailing around islands in China, because the United States is contesting China's territorial water claims to the East China Sea, seems like a ridiculous thing to be doing. Maybe these guys are guilty, maybe they weren't paying attention, they were both getting high in their cabins, whatever, when their ships ran to merchant ships. But at the same time, I hope everybody looks to the policymakers that put the U.S. ships in these positions and looks at them for negligent homicide as well. We had the official policy from the Trump administration on U.S. aid to the UN Palestinian Refugee Agency, and that is they'll cut the aid, what they say, in half. They're going to cut $65 million of the $125 million that the U.S. gave to that agency. For about the past month, the United States has halted giving that aid to the UN, saying they were considering what to do with it. In Somalia, we have 4,000 people who were living in refugee camps outside the capital city of Mogadishu, evicted from their homes. Apparently, troops came in, bulldozed their homes out of the way, which, were more or less just makeshift tents on the side of the road, I guess, in Mogadishu. However, that was where they lived. They had shelter. Having a home is very, very important. And they were destroyed, and so now all these people are homeless and have been so for 2 weeks. And of course, this is the problem. This is why you can never win. This is why the United States foreign policy will never work. You'll never win, is because these are the people the United States is backing that are evicting the people from their homes. This is going to turn so many people against the United States. It's irredeemable. Every time we bomb the civilians, we have the massacre in Baraari that U.S. troops were taking part of. It just becomes so obvious that you can never win one of these counterinsurgencies. We also have a lot of fighting breaking out in Libya's capital at Tripoli. This is the area where the United States-backed government operates. The problem with Libya is it's just super, super fractured right now. There's militias all over the place. Nobody knows who to declare allegiance to. I guess they're going to try to arrange some kind of elections in Libya. I don't know how that's actually going to work, but one of the candidates is going to be the son of the former leader there. Elections are supposed to take place before September 30th of this year. And then this is one of the other interesting things too. I think it was Rex Tillerson in his statement that was saying that the United States doesn't want to see Syria end up like another Libya. Well, the problem in Libya is that you killed Gaddafi and then you fractured the country and there was no unifying rule. And so refugees poured through and the Tuaregs were massacred and people were sold into slavery and everybody's getting raped and warring. You have a former CIA stooge warlord backed by Russia and the UAE ruling the eastern half of that country right now. And so if you don't want that to happen, don't take out the straw man. And that's exactly what the U.S. policy in Syria is claiming to be. Just an update on Spain, we had the Spanish government saying that the Spain central government in Madrid will continue to rule Catalonia if Catalonia doesn't pick a new leader other than the independence leader who's currently in exile in, I believe Belgium right now. He's, if he comes back in, he'll be arrested and he's a political prisoner of sorts. In Japan, following the United States false alarm in Hawaii about incoming ballistic missile, Japan news station issued one as well. Interesting how things work out, I guess. I don't think I have a whole lot of analysis on this issue. I guess I don't see any evidence of any kind of conspiracy or anything like that, although it's certainly a very odd coincidence. And then, I just wanted to point out, so everybody's been heralding that Saudi Arabia hosted a public screening of a film for the first time in like 30 years. Now, let me explain what happened to you here, people. Apparently it was shot in like a makeshift tent and only rich men were allowed to go. And then they screened Emoji Movie, which is like the lowest performing movie ever. So it's like some kind of joke. So that's where I'm going to wrap up the show today. foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com, the libertarianinstitute.org, the Facebook page, the Libertarian Union, Twitter at KYAAALE. I think that's it. Thanks everyone.